I have lived through pain that does not have a name, but nothing prepared me for what happened that Thanksgiving night. The house smelled of rosemary turkey, cinnamon pie, and the kind of false peace families put on like Sunday clothes. My son, Greg, stood across the dining table, breathing hard, his jaw tight, his eyes colder than the Idaho winter outside. It started with a single sentence. I said, "Greg, please lower your voice. This is Thanksgiving, not a battlefield." He stared at me like I was a stranger trespassing in his life. Before I could blink, he walked around the table with heavy footsteps that made the floor creak. My sister Margaret gasped. Carla, my friend from church, covered her mouth. Then it happened. Greg's palm cracked across my face so hard the room spun. The sound silenced every voice, every breath. My cheek burned, but before I could react, he leaned in and spat on me. His spit slid down my chin and dropped onto my blouse like a stain that could never wash out. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not raise my hand. I smiled. Not because I was unbothered, but because I felt something shift in the air, something spiritual, something ancient. I looked him dead in the eye and whispered a prayer so soft no one heard it but God himself. And 48 hours later, the consequences of that single prayer came knocking so loud the whole world could hear. But before I tell you what happened, I need to take a moment to acknowledge something very important. To everyone who has subscribed to this channel, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your constant support is the fuel that keeps stories like this alive. And to all my new and returning viewers who have not yet subscribed, I appreciate you deeply. I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because you are the energy that powers this channel forward. Do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments and engage with the story as it unfolds. Now, let us get back into it. My name is Joanne. I am 52 years old, born and raised in Idaho, and I have spent most of my life fighting battles no one sees. I raised my son Greg mostly alone. His father walked out when I was 3 months pregnant and never once looked back. Greg is 28 now, tall, handsome, and sharp-tongued in a way that can charm a crowd or cut a soul in half. I used to think his anger came from not having a father in his life, but over time, I began to feel something darker at work. At the Thanksgiving table that evening were only 4 people. Greg, my only child, full of resentment I still did not understand. Margaret, my older sister, with a tongue like a snake wrapped in silk. Carla, my friend from church, who I invited because she had no family nearby. And me. You would think with only 4 chairs filled, the house would feel empty, but the tension in that room made it feel crowded with ghosts. The evening had started politely. Turkey carved, mashed potatoes passed around, fake compliments exchanged like counterfeit money. Greg had been quiet at first. Too quiet. His fork scraped against the plate in a slow, deliberate way, as if every bite irritated his soul. Margaret kept throwing looks at him as though they shared a secret. Carla and I tried to keep the conversation light. Then something shifted. I don't even remember what triggered the explosion. Maybe it was when I reminded Greg to bless the food before eating. Maybe it was when I mentioned being grateful for surviving a hard year. Or maybe it was the bitterness already inside him, searching for a match to strike. He slammed his fork down and said, "You should be the last person talking about gratitude." His voice dripped with disgust. I stared at him, confused. "What does that mean, Greg?" I asked, careful not to raise my voice. He stared at me like I was a stranger trespassing in his life. By the time I could blink, he walked around the table with heavy footsteps that made the floor creak. My sister Margaret gasped. Carla, my friend from church, covered her mouth. Then it happened. Greg's palm cracked across my face so hard the room spun. The sound silenced every voice, every breath. My cheek burned, but before I could react, he leaned in and spat on me. His spit slid down my chin and dropped onto my blouse like a stain that could never wash out. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not raise my hand. I smiled. Not because I was unbothered, but because I felt something shift in the air, something spiritual, something ancient. I looked him dead in the eye and whispered a prayer so soft no one heard it but God himself. And 48 hours later, the consequences of that single prayer came knocking so loud the whole world could hear. But before I tell you what happened, I need to take a moment to acknowledge something very important. Before the prayer was even finished, someone at that table had already set the next disaster in motion.
I did not sleep that night. My face still carried the echo of Greg's hand, and my blouse still felt stained with his spit, even after I changed out of it. I sat in my living room long after everyone had left, staring at the empty chairs around the dining table. I could still hear the silence that came after the slap. Not one person moved. Not one voice rose. Not even Carla, who had always been quick to speak on my behalf. I wanted to believe I had raised my son better than that. I wanted to think this was some sudden madness that came out of nowhere. But truth does not arrive unannounced. It always sends warnings, small, sharp, and easy to ignore. Now, in the quiet of the night, those signs came back to me like ghosts. I had Greg when I was 24. His father, Henry, was gone 3 months into the pregnancy. He said he was not ready to be a father. Then he packed a single bag and disappeared like he was never meant to stay. I raised Greg in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Boise. I worked at a local grocery store during the day and cleaned offices at night. I used to sew his clothes by hand when money was too tight to buy new ones. I did not complain. I did not ask for help. But my sister, Margaret, was always there, watching from her comfortable life with her husband, Thomas. She would send used clothes or leftover groceries sometimes, but her gifts always came with quiet insults. "You're so brave," she would say with a smile. "I do not know how you do it alone. Some women just attract the kind of men who leave." I would bite my tongue and say thank you, even when her words stung like salt in a wound. Greg grew up quiet but sensitive. He was the kind of child who watched everything and felt deeply. When he was 10, he asked me one night, "Why did Dad leave us?" I told him the truth as gently as I could. He was not strong enough to stay. But as Greg got older, that answer stopped being enough. When Greg turned 16, something changed. He started working part-time at a car wash and spending more time with his friends than with me. He stopped hugging me goodbye. He stopped asking about my day. When I would try to talk to him, he would shrug me off or roll his eyes. I thought it was just teenage attitude. I told myself he would grow out of it. But it did not fade. It grew claws. One night at dinner, he said, "Maybe Dad left because you are hard to live with." I froze. I asked him calmly, "Who told you that?" He shrugged and said, "I just know." But I knew he had heard it from somewhere else. Margaret had started visiting more frequently around that time. She would bring him expensive sneakers, gadgets, and take him out for meals I couldn't afford. At first, I thought she was trying to help. But then I started noticing how Greg came back quieter, colder. He once said to me, "Aunt Margaret says you never let anyone help you because you always want to be the hero." I confronted Margaret. I told her, "Do not fill my son's head with things you do not understand." She smiled like she was being misunderstood and replied, "I'm only telling him the truth you hide." That was the beginning of a fracture I did not know how to seal. When Greg graduated high school, he moved in with Margaret and his husband for a few months while attending a trade school across town. I did not like the arrangement, but he insisted on it. "It's just temporary," he said. "Stop being controlling." He stayed for almost a year. By the time he moved out, he was a different person. He would speak to me like I was a burden, like everything I had done for him was some invisible debt he never asked for. I remember one day I visited his new apartment to drop off a care package of groceries. He took the bag and said, "You don't have to pretend. I know you only do this to feel like a better mother." That sentence broke something inside me. I asked him, "Who told you that?" He said, "Nobody had to. Some things are obvious." But I saw Margaret's shadow behind those words. Carla, my friend from church, was one of the few people who noticed the shift. She once told me, "Joanne, bitterness does not grow in a day. Someone has been watering it." I brushed it off because I didn't have proof. I believed time would heal it. I believed love would win. I did not know that people who hate quietly can do more damage than those who scream. 2 years before that Thanksgiving dinner, I had a falling out with Margaret. She had offered Greg a job at her husband's real estate firm, but I told Greg to think about building something of his own first. She said I was sabotaging his life so he would never leave me. Greg believed her. I saw the resentment in his eyes months before the slap. He stopped visiting on my birthday. He skipped Christmas with me one year and sent a text that read, "I'm spending it with people who see my worth." I cried that night until my chest ached. The day before Thanksgiving, Greg called me and said, "Don't make a big deal out of tomorrow. I'm only coming because Aunt Margaret insisted." His words were dull blades, but I still cooked his favorite dishes. I still cleaned the house from top to bottom. I still set the table like it was a peace offering. I had no idea what he was carrying. I had no clue someone had been preparing him for war. Now, after the slap, I looked at the empty plates and the abandoned chairs and replayed his words over and over. "You know what you did." But I didn't. Not yet. The truth was coming, but I wasn't ready for the shape it would take. Because the betrayal that poisoned my son did not start with hatred. It started with someone who claimed to love him. And that person was closer than I ever imagined.
I woke up the next morning with my cheeks still tender and my soul strangely quiet. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not replay the slap 1,000 times like most people would expect. Instead, my mind kept circling back to that single prayer I whispered the moment Greg's spit touched my skin. "God, if this is the way the truth must come out, then let it begin." Those words were not rehearsed. They rose from a place inside me that was older than pain, older than motherhood. I had no idea what I was truly asking for, but I felt something shift the moment I said it, like gears turning in the dark. By the time the clock struck 7 a.m., I had already changed the bed sheets, washed the dishes from Thanksgiving night, and swept the kitchen floor twice. I needed movement to push back the weight of silence. Then, around 9 a.m., someone knocked. Not gently. 3 hard pounds against my front door, as if the person on the other side believed the world owed them entry. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there with her lips pressed tight and her eyes full of something I could not read yet. Beside her, to my surprise, was Carla, my friend who had stayed silent the night before. Carla would not meet my gaze. My stomach tightened. "Can we come in?" Margaret asked, not out of respect but expectation. I stepped aside. They sat on my couch like they were here to conduct official business. I remained standing. Margaret spoke first. "Before you twist what happened yesterday into one of your stories, you need to understand something important." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Go on." She folded her hands in her lap and said, "Greg's anger did not come out of nowhere. He finally found the courage to tell the truth about how you destroyed his father's life." For a second, I could not breathe. "His father?" I whispered. "Are you talking about Henry?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes, Greg knows everything now, and frankly, I do not blame him for reacting." I stared at her confused and horrified. "What lies have you been spreading?" She smirked. "Oh, so now it's lies. You really want to pretend you did not drive Henry away? You want to deny that he tried to come back for Greg and you pushed him out of our lives." My mouth dried. "What did you say to him?" I asked quietly. She did not hesitate.
The truth. That Henry reached out to you when Greg was 5 and you shut him out. That he sent money, gifts, messages, and you threw them away so you could play the martyr and blame him for leaving. Tears stung my eyes, not from guilt, but from disbelief. That never happened, I said slowly. Henry never reached out. He never sent anything. But before I could say more, Carla finally spoke. Joanne, maybe he did reach out and you just don't remember? I turned toward her in shock. Carla, why would you say that? She glanced at Margaret as if waiting for permission to continue. My heart sank. That is when I saw it, I said quietly. You knew this was coming before you knocked, didn't you? Carla lowered her head. Memories began connecting themselves in my mind. When Greg was 5, I moved into a cheaper apartment to save money. Around that same time, a few envelopes came in the mail with no return address. I remember thinking they were bills or advertisements and tossing them aside unopened because collectors were chasing me back then. I never knew who sent them. But now, standing there, something else hit me harder. There had been a day years ago when Margaret came to visit unexpectedly. She had brought a box of old things, claiming she had cleared out some storage. While I was folding laundry in the bedroom, I heard her moving things around near the front door. When I came back, I saw an envelope peeking from her purse, not addressed to her. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it all sharpened in my mind with terrifying clarity. You took his letters, didn't you? I said, my voice trembling. You took anything Henry sent. You made sure I never saw it. Margaret did not deny it. Instead, she smiled. Her smile was not victorious, it was poisonous. You were always too proud to admit your failures. I did what was necessary to protect Greg from being dragged back and forth. Henry was garbage, but you made everyone believe you were some abandoned saint. So you lied to him? I asked. No, she said calmly. I told him the version that made sense. And now? He knows you never showed him the messages his father sent. Carla whispered, I only knew pieces. Margaret told me Henry had reached out once or twice. I believed her. I stepped back as if the air itself was cutting me. And what about the things you told Greg? I asked, my voice low. Did you feed him the same poison? She crossed her legs delicately. I told him the truth he needed, that you refused his father's access, that you wanted credit for suffering. He believes Henry wanted him? She nodded. Because I showed him proof. I froze. Proof? What proof? I whispered. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and held up a picture of a stack of letters. I recognized Henry's handwriting instantly. My knees nearly buckled. You kept them, I said. All of this time. Margaret's voice was steady. I kept what you were too unstable to handle. Carla looked shaken. She whispered, Margaret, why did you never tell Joanne? Margaret answered simply, because she did not deserve to know. My throat closed. And Greg? I asked. She looked up without blinking. He deserved to know who you really are. 48 hours had not passed, but God was already turning shadows into mirrors. I stood there with the kind of calm that doesn't come from strength, but from surrender. I said, Get out of my house. Margaret lifted her chin. Don't pretend you are the victim here. Carla stood up slowly, torn and visibly ashamed. Joanne, I'm sorry. I should have asked questions. I pointed to the door. Both of you, out. Margaret walked past me with the confidence of someone who still believed she had won. But something in the room had already shifted against her. Because the prayer I whispered that night was not a request for revenge. It was an invitation for truth. And God was not finished yet. 48 hours had not passed, not yet. But when they did, someone was going to choke on the lies they swallowed. By the time the sun rose on the second day after Thanksgiving, the air around me felt different, heavy, quiet in a way that meant something was moving beneath the surface. I did not call Greg, I did not text Margaret, and I did not try to defend myself to anyone. I moved through my house, speaking nothing but silent prayers. 48 hours. I did not know why that number clung to my spirit, but it did. That morning, around 8 a.m., I was sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea when my phone began to ring. I expected it to be Carla, or maybe Greg with another accusation. But it was neither. It was Thomas, Margaret's husband. I stared at the caller ID a long time before answering. His voice came through shaky but clear. "Joanne, I need to talk to you. It is about Greg." My chest tightened. "What happened to my son?" He hesitated. "Can you meet me at St. Luke's Hospital?" My blood ran cold. I stood up so fast the chair nearly fell over. "Is he alive?" "Yes," he said quickly, "but you need to come now." I grabbed my coat and keys and was out the door before the call ended. The drive to the hospital felt like a dream I could not wake from. The snow from the night before had not fully melted, and the roads were wet and glistening. My hands were tight around the steering wheel, and my heart pounded like thunder in a small room. When I reached the emergency entrance, I saw Thomas pacing near the sliding doors. His normally calm face was drawn and pale. "What happened?" I demanded. He exhaled sharply. He collapsed at work. Some kind of stress-induced episode. His blood pressure skyrocketed and he blacked out. A cold wave passed through me. "Where is he now?" "They are running more tests. He is conscious, but..." Thomas's eyes dropped to the ground. "He kept asking for you." I froze in place. "For me?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes. He said your name before the ambulance took him. Over and over." I could not speak. He led me through the hallway to a private room. I expected to see Greg sleeping or hooked to machines. I was not prepared for what I saw instead. Greg sat upright in the bed, eyes red-rimmed and swollen, hands trembling. He looked like a man who had wrestled a ghost and lost. When he saw me standing in the doorway, he started crying, loud, broken tears that shook his whole body. He held out his hands to me like a child. "Mom," he whispered, "I am so sorry." My breath caught in my chest. I stepped forward slowly, unsure as this was real. He grabbed my hand and pulled it to his face, like he was afraid I would disappear. Forgive me," he said through tears. "I did not know. I swear I did not know." I swallowed hard. "Greg, what changed?" He wiped his face with the back of his arm and spoke in a hoarse voice. "Aunt Margaret told me everything. She showed me the letters. She said Dad tried to come back. She said you kept him away so you could play the victim." His voice broke. I believed her. My heart clenched, but I stayed silent. He continued, "But yesterday morning, when I was at their house, I overheard something. They thought I was asleep on the couch. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Thomas were arguing in the kitchen. She told him she wished she had destroyed those letters before I saw them. She said she never meant for me to find out that she was the one who kept Dad away from you and from me." His voice cracked again. "She said she only started telling me about the letters 2 years ago because she was angry you refused to take the job offer for me. She said she wanted you to pay. She admitted she lied about you throwing things away. She said it was
easy to turn me against you because I already resented you." Tears slid down his cheeks, raw and unfiltered. I confronted her. She did not deny it. She just told me I was too blind to see the truth faster. We argued. I left the house angry. I went to work anyway, even though I felt like I couldn't breathe. He took a shaky breath. And then my chest got tight. The room started spinning. Next thing I know, I'm in the ambulance. I stood still for a long moment, letting the silence settle. Then I sat down beside him. He rested his head on my shoulder like he used to when he was a child fighting nightmares. "He said horrible things to you," he whispered. "I can't take them back." "No," I said quietly. "You cannot." He cried harder. "But I forgive you," I added softly. He wrapped his arms around me and sobbed into my chest. Thomas stepped back from the doorway quietly, giving us space. Later that afternoon, while Greg was being monitored, hospital security escorted Margaret into the lobby. Thomas had told them she was not to enter Greg's room. She saw me sitting alone near the window and stormed over. "You think one emotional breakdown changes everything?" she hissed. I looked up at her with a calm I did not expect to feel. "No," I said, "but the truth has already started." She scoffed. "You think God is on your side because your son fainted." I stood slowly and walked towards her until we were face to face. "I did not ask God to punish you. I asked him to reveal what was hidden, and he did." For the first time in a long while, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but I walked away before she could, and I did not look back. That night, sitting beside Greg's hospital bed while he slept, I finally understood why I smiled when he struck me. It was not madness. It was recognition. The slap was not the breaking point. It was the unveiling. Sometimes the worst moments are not punishments, but doorways. And sometimes the prayer you whisper in the middle of humiliation becomes the trumpet that calls truth out of hiding. 48 hours after he slapped and spat on me, my son saw the face of the real enemy. Not me, not himself, but the person who had been feeding him venom behind closed doors. And God made sure the poison could not hide any longer. If you watched the story to the end, thank you. I hope it touched something deep inside you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And please, tell me, in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my shoes?